For a brief moment when I was remodeling our backyard shed into an office for my wife, Hilary, I thought, maybe I'll make one of those how-to videos for YouTube. The moment didn't last long, which is fine, because it was really a different kind of story anyway. We were expecting a baby in July, and Hilary had no place in our house to close the door and do her writing and editing work, but we had gotten a decent tax return, so we thought we'd make her an office. We had a few ideas. We could buy a new shed, have it dropped off, and fix it up a little bit to make it livable. Or we could buy an old camping trailer and drop that in the backyard. Or we could take a look at the old shed in our backyard, which had nothing in it but landscaping tools and some junk. We chose option 3. Or rather, I did, because by this time Hilary was almost 7 months pregnant. Like many home improvement projects approached by an ignorant optimist, it seemed pretty straightforward. Put in a floor, add some insulation, redo the roof, voila. I was probably overlooking a few things. But come on, how big of a deal could it be? I mean, it was already a building. You can probably guess how this all worked out. Literally every aspect of it took longer than I thought it would because A, I had no fucking idea what I was doing, and B, actually I guess I had no fucking idea what I was doing pretty much covers it. I started with the floor, adding joists that were tied into the wall studs. But in order to have a floor that didn't feel like a trampoline, I needed to add way more wall studs, because the original ones were 24 inches apart. Thankfully, most of the old stuff was really straight and square. The one thing that was not square, or at least rectangular, and this would haunt almost every step of the process, was the whole damn building. A rectangular building would have been fucking wonderful, but this was an irregular heptagon. Now, if you're thinking, I've always wanted to remodel a building that's an irregular heptagon. Let me tell you right now, that's a terrible idea. Alas, I had already committed. As an ultramarathon runner, commitment means I was in it for the long haul, no matter what. I had burned the boats in order to take the island. So I started with the floor. Actually, you know what? That's not true. I had to relocate our compost bins that were leaning up against the back wall of the shed first, because I'd never be able to get behind them in order to work on the shed. So I went and grabbed some pallets from the flooring store a few blocks away and built some new bins, then moved all of our old compost into them. I found a dead mouse in there. Oh, this old greenhouse in the photo? I'm gonna have to tear that down too, but I didn't know it yet. Anyway, the floor. I added 2x6 joists all the way across the heptagonal floor, then added blocking to them to stabilize them a bit. Saying it in one sentence is pretty funny because it took weeks for me to get it done. I was working, the baby was due in a few weeks, so we had all these doctor's appointments to go to, and then we found out Ralph, our dog, had cancer. So there were dog doctor visits, chemo treatments, and driving all over town trying to find food he would eat. With all that going on, the shed started to become sort of an escape for me. It was a place where I could focus on problems with straightforward solutions. I don't know how to make a baby arrive on time or safely. I can't cure my dog's cancer, but I can measure wood, cut it, and attach it to some other wood, and know if it's correct or not. So I did that. At some point after the baby arrived, Hilary would need a space to work and or just hide from the baby and me, and I was gonna make it. Of all the love languages, manual labor is the most direct sometimes. Then the baby was a few days late, and a few more days late, and then Ralph went downhill really quickly, and he died. He wasn't young, and the more I think about it, the more I think he knew the baby was coming, and things were gonna get complicated, and he just called it a day instead. And then the baby came. We stayed in the hospital with him for 4 days, and then went home, where we were all alone trying to keep a baby alive. Hilary basically couldn't leave the house for a couple weeks, so I picked up Ralph's ashes by myself and sat out in a parking lot with them, wishing I had my dog back. We were in survival mode, scrambling to take care of a fragile little baby with very little time to be sad about our dog. I would steal away for an hour here or there to work on the shed, feeling the urgency to get it done before the rainy fall started. I didn't think so at the time, but I was going a little hard for a guy my age who sits at a keyboard all week. I got the floor done and insulated with 2 layers of foam board that I had to cut one at a time in, again, irregularly sized pieces. It was fine. I dropped sheathing on top of the insulation and screwed it down, and with an actual floor I could walk on, I could start seeing it become a livable space instead of a dumpy old shed. I started on the exterior next, replacing rotted wall sheathing so I could start figuring out where to put the door and windows. A friend with a lot of experience in construction told me installing a door for the first time might not be that easy and said, You might want to YouTube that. I explained that yes, YouTubing shit was the one thing I was very much on top of, and that I had probably watched about 100 hours of YouTube videos so far. Somewhere in the middle of this, I realized I would have to tear down the greenhouse abutting the shed, as it was going to cause lots of problems. It had been overgrown with vines when we moved in, and Hilary had cut most of them away from it. But inside the front wall, I found this. It took most of a day to tear down the greenhouse. Okay, then I got to work on adding the sheathing on the exterior walls. Then it was time to redo the roof. Jay was now 1 month old. This might be a good time to talk about the idea of making a YouTube video about your home improvement project, and the primary reason I failed at that, besides the fact that, as previously noted, I had no idea what the fuck I was doing. To make a YouTube video, you have to record video. Maybe this seems obvious. I guess it didn't to me, because this is the first long clip I shot, putting my iPhone on a little tripod for this bit. I'm not sure why I decided to record this, but it occurs to me now that the recording might have been useful to Hilary to show the doctor at the emergency room when she found me unconscious in the backyard. So basically, I missed the first half of the project. Then I tried to record a lot of the last half, but I forgot a bunch of times, and then I screwed up the shot a lot, and then I didn't have enough memory left on my phone to store all the video clips. So my phone ended up recording like 10 seconds and then cutting off. Anyway, adding the roof decking by myself was dumb and borderline dangerous. Basically, I screwed 2x4s at the bottom edge of the sloped roof and then slid the big sheets of OSB down to rest on them, and then screwed the OSB sheets down. But of course, the roof was also an irregular heptagon, so for a lot of it, I had to slide a sheet into place, mark where I needed to cut it, slide it back off the roof, cut it, and then put it back on the roof. Lots of triangles. Also, the roof was mostly straight, except for this beam, which was a few inches higher than all the rafters. I tried a bunch of different things, including replacing some of the rafters, but in the end, it was way too much geometry, and I just decided that the finished roof was going to have a little bit of a curve in it. I'm sure somebody on YouTube will have plenty of advice about how I could have done it better, but you know, at some point, I had to admit to myself that this is a fucking shed, not a cathedral. Here's another thing that was hilarious. The original shed was built about 18 inches from the property line, so all the work on the east wall was in this alley that was barely big enough for me to walk down sideways. It was usually okay, but other days, I contorted myself into more positions more times than I would have during a 10-pitch rock climb. And also, the nail gun didn't always fit into that space, so I had to hand pound a lot of nails. And sometimes I couldn't fit a hammer in there, so I'd have to use a hammer sideways. I put a drip edge on the ends of the roof and then put ice and water shield over the roof decking. And then the roofing fell. Something else I started doing as the project wore on from weeks into months, I made everyone who visited us put in at least one nail or cut a piece of wood or help me for a couple minutes. Here's my sister-in-law, Whitney. She came all the way from New Zealand. I didn't know if it was going to be necessary or even smart, but I bought all this really expensive tape to seal off all the gaps in the wall sheathing. I covered the entire roof with foam board insulation, then put 1x4 slats over that to screw the metal roof panels onto. And then over the span of about 24 hours, I put the metal roof in with the help of my father-in-law, Tom. Of course, Hilary would want electricity in her new shed office, so I talked to our electrician about doing it. And he said, "Sure thing. Do you want to dig the trench, or do you want us to?" I figured I'd save a bunch of money digging it myself, and I don't have a lot of talents, but digging trenches is well within my skill set. Right around this time, I was starting to have some back pain, which was nagging at first, and then it moved into my hip, which then started having shooting pains in it, and then I couldn't sleep in any position except for on my back. The inside of my right knee went numb, and then the inside of my right calf, and then the top of my foot, and then for a while I was having a hard time lifting the toes of my right foot when I walked around. After about 5 weeks of going to physical therapy, a chiropractor figured out my femoral nerve was being pinched, and it started to get better, which was good because I had to run the New York City Marathon in a few weeks. Then I added the house wrap. My niece, Mary, came all the way from Wisconsin to help with that. When I was younger, I was pretty susceptible to media cliches about love, like the parts of the relationship they show in movies where it's mostly grand romantic gestures and maybe some heroic and/or dramatic moments. Those stuck in my head for a long time. The older I get, the more I think that a relationship is about helping each other in as many ways as you can. Like, I probably won't be in a situation where I grab Hilary's hand just before she falls off a cliff, or fight off kidnappers or something like that. More like I clean toilets, shovel snow, cook dinner, wash dishes, and occasionally learn and use a new skill, such as weatherizing a small building. Next, I put in the windows. And the door. Jay was now 2 months old. I cut and put up the trim around the windows, door, and the outside corners. Becca came to visit as I was putting up the siding, which took a week of afternoons. In the middle of this project, my friend Devin emailed me this article about an Italian word, umarell, which refers to a retired man who stands and watches construction sites, typically with his hands clasped behind his back. I replied, "My 83-year-old neighbor Pat has been head umarell on my shed project all summer. Some days, I swear Pat would hear the sound of a saw starting up and would appear in a few seconds. A lot of days, I didn't feel like I had much time to chat with him, as I felt the constant pressure to finish the exterior of the building before it started raining and snowing in late October and early November, and it never felt like I was making progress quickly enough." Christy came to visit and drove in some screws.
I mean, the shed is awesome and everything, but this screw right there.
Of the many things I learned during this journey, one of the most important is that there is one huge difference between OSI Quad and OSI Quad Max. One of them, Quad Max, is a sealant that dries in about 24 hours, and the other, Quad, takes several days to dry, or way more if you heap gobs of it into the gaps between the siding you installed and the window frames because you failed to measure and or cut correctly. So when I started painting, I had to avoid these parts. My parents came to visit and wanted to help with the shed, and let me tell you, they are not scared of a monotonous task like painting. Squeeze here?
Yeah, I am. It reminds me of, what's that place that we went through when we were going through the water?
Little Wild Horse and Bell Canyons,
Yeah.
Slot Canyon.
Yeah, it reminds me of a slot canyon.
Yeah, only not nearly as fun.
Well, there's no water in here.
Yeah, that is nice. Jay turned 3 months old while they were here. Then I cut a million fucking pieces of insulation to fit in between the wall studs and the ceiling rafters. Elizabeth came to visit and she helped me trim the spray foam I'd used to seal the insulation, which she claimed to enjoy. Right around the time Jay turned 4 months old, at the beginning of November, the leaves fell off all the trees, all at once. I ran the New York City Marathon with my friend Sid, his last one ever. It was 70 degrees in New York that day, and at home it was snowing. The electricians put in wiring for outlets and light fixtures, and they recommended I take a video of the wiring so that when it was covered with drywall, I could still see where everything went. They also told me not to put in the outlets or light switches until after the drywall guys finished, because I'd end up with drywall mud all over them. But I went ahead and put them in anyway. The electricians were right. It was fine. See that snow on the ground? That was early November. I figured it would melt off before winter really arrived, but we wouldn't see the bare ground again until April. A friend of mine told me that if you're gonna hire someone to do something instead of DIYing it, make that thing drywall, because it's really easy to make it look really bad. I've tried a couple times, and I can confirm that I can make a wall look like absolute shit, so I hired some guys. I painted the walls and ceiling a couple days before Thanksgiving, then plugged in the lights and screwed in the outlet covers. It was starting to feel like I might get the whole thing finished before the end of the year. I put the flooring down in one marathon day on Black Friday. And then I cut and stained the baseboards and the trim for the windows and door. And then I put those in, the last step. Or at least the last hammering I'd have to do in a big year of hammering. That was November 30th, just before Jay turned 5 months old. We finally moved all of Hilary's stuff into the shed on January 8th, and she had a space of her own where she could shut the door, be creative, and be as messy as she wanted to. I was just happy to have crossed off the last item on my to-do list. We always talk about how important it is to tell people you love them. It is important. But if I'm honest, I probably don't do it often enough. I try to show people that I love them with large and small gestures, and spending my time and effort on things I hope they'll understand. Sometimes, I get in a little over my head. But I don't mind.